The Good Samaritan. The Good Samaritan is a name that we know well, and we even know this story well. Outside of the resurrection itself, I don't think there's a more powerful story that has influenced so many cultures. The Good Samaritan has influenced our culture so much that it's even in the dictionary. If I say Good Samaritan, you know it means to help someone. If I say a Good Samaritan came by and saw me today, you know somebody helped me. When I was a kid, I remember when we took trips, say to Illinois or the mountains or the beach, I would love to spot the RVs that had this little round sign on their bumper. And it had this little pasty guy on the front that looked like he was from Wisconsin or something with the big jowls and the black hair. But he had a halo on top of his head. And if you remember, it was the Good Samaritan Club. And if you belong to the Good Samaritan Club, you got one of these stickers to put in the back. Because back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, well, if your car broke down or you were out of gas or you blew out a tire, well, you were just out of luck until a police officer showed up or somebody was willing to help you. And that's what the Good Samaritans did. They would come and they would help somebody with gas or whatever it is that they need. But I love the sign, or I love the little sticker, because I just thought it was so cool to see the little guy's head, you know, with that halo. But I will tell you, that image of the halo and the Good Samaritan is not what the Jewish people would have seen during Jesus' time. Absolutely not. Even though they have a common ancestry and the same God, the Samaritans and Jews do not like each other. Matter of fact, if I said they hated each other, I probably wouldn't be far off. We're talking a group that is like water and oil. They just didn't get along. The reason I want to tell you that is I'm setting the stage for what Jesus is talking about, so we will really understand through the eyes of the people who heard. But they do not like each other. There's also a road from Jerusalem to Jericho and back that actually is kind of like a crescent moon. There's a highway on it today, but back then it was in the canyons and it was a wide road. And it was of long ways. There's actually a direct route from Jericho to Jerusalem, or Jerusalem to Jericho. However, the Jewish people would love to travel on this particular side road, even though it takes them about 3 times longer to get there, because if they take the shortcut, that's through Samaritan country. And we don't want to do that. They didn't want to be around Samaritans, and trust me, the Samaritans were glad that they would go around. Now, everybody used this highway. But I want you to remember that particular highway, because you would usually go in packs because it could be quite dangerous. Let's put that away for a minute. Then we're going to see a lawyer coming on the stage at the very beginning. And the lawyers, obviously they know biblical law. They know the Torah. They know it well, inside and out. And the lawyers' jobs would be at times to make sure that people were abiding by the law, the strict code that they had. If they got a call that somebody down the street was eating the wrong food, or they weren't practicing what they were supposed to in prayer, it would be the lawyer to go down and say, what are you doing? And don't you know the scriptures say this and this and this? Now, another thing that they would do is they would go, because, trust me, Jesus isn't the only one that's this so-called prophet coming up. There are others who say that they are from God and that they're prophets, self-proclaimed prophets. We still see them today. But it would be the lawyer's job to go and start to question them about exactly who you are. Because after all, if it's a real prophet, don't you want to know it? And so they would go. But the other thing that they would do is basically try to debunk what the person is saying. What I mean is they start to get followers, and it's a whole lot easier to sit there and question them in front of all their followers, because if they can make them either look like they're crazy or they're liars, then the people that are around them and supporting them will eventually walk away, and you've just taken that power from that particular person. And so we find ourselves today where Jesus has been going city to city to city, to town to village, and he's been performing miracles and talking about the kingdom of God. Well, a lawyer, it says, right? We just talked about the lawyer. The lawyer comes up to him and says, "Teacher, I have a question for you. What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus looks at him and says, "Well, you tell me, you're the lawyer. What does the law say?" He says, "Well, it says," and he gives him the Shema. The Shema is a prayer that every Jewish man, woman, and child would say in the morning, afternoon, and evening. I will love the Lord with all my heart, with all my mind, with all my soul, and with all of my strength. And I will love my neighbor as myself. And Jesus says, you have answered correctly, and you will live. But this isn't the question he wants to get him with. What he wants to get him with is the next question. Who is my neighbor? And what he's trying to do is trap Jesus. Because if Jesus says, well, the neighbor is like yourself, it's God's chosen people, it's the Jewish people, then the lawyer can say, then why have you been doing all these miracles and talking to Samaritans and Gentiles and saving a Roman slave? How come you're with these people on the outside of the circle? If Jesus would have said, all people, the lawyer would have turned around and said, oh, so you're trading against God's chosen. In other words, either way, he's got it. But instead of Jesus answering the question, he gives him a story. Let me ask you this. There was a good Jewish man walking down the road between Jericho and Jerusalem. I'm going to tell you immediately, this lawyer would have known exactly where he's talking about. He's taken the highway himself. Just like all of us in our kind of selfish ways, we put ourselves in every story, right? You immediately, anytime you hear a story, you think of something in common that you have with that, because you're ready to tell your story. And it would have been no different with this lawyer. He hears about this Jewish man on this road, one that he has traveled on, I'm sure, several times, and probably alone. And I'm going to tell you, if you've ever been alone in those canyons and stuff, it's scary, just like it would be here today. When we're alone, we're vulnerable. We don't know what's going to happen. And I'm sure this lawyer had that fear every time he walked, looking around, making sure he's going to be okay. So he could easily put himself as the Jewish man. So he says this Jewish man is walking down the road when suddenly bandits get a hold of him and they strip him and they steal everything from him and they beat him till he's half dead. You know how bad he must be beaten up to be half dead? Pretty darn bad. And there he lays on the road. He says later on in that afternoon that a priest comes by and he sees him and he walks to the other side and he passes him. And then a Levite walks up and he sees him also and he goes to the other side and walks past him. He says then a Samaritan, oh, the Samaritans. The Samaritan sees him and it says he has pity on him. And he comes, and you can imagine him turning the man over and seeing that he's still alive. He takes oil and he takes wine and he pours on the wounds. He bandages the man up. It says he puts him then on his animal and he takes him to an inn where he spends the night taking care of the man. The next day, obviously, he needs to get on with his business and he stops by the innkeeper and says, here's 2 denarii. I want you to take care of him. If the bill is higher than this, keep the bill, and when I come back through, you have my word, I will pay it. Jesus looked at the lawyer and says, now you tell me, who was the Jewish man's neighbor? And the lawyer said, the Samaritan, because he showed mercy. And Jesus says, you've answered correctly. Now you go and do likewise. You see, there is no love lost between the Samaritans, and this had to be really hard for the lawyer to say such a thing, to really think about it. But what Jesus is trying to say is that the Scripture, the laws of the Torah, are made to bring people to God. It is to show the mercy and love of God. That's what Jesus is doing. This is what He's teaching. It's not to be used over people or to hurt them or to make them, put them in fear. It is to show the love of God to every single one of the people. And so He wants to show him. You see, to understand, and the early people would have understood this, is the priest and the Levite aren't bad people. What they were doing was living by the law in the strict term. You see, the priest and the Levite cannot touch someone who is dead. If they do, they have to go through a long period of days of cleaning ritual because they can't touch something unclean. And if they do, that means if they go through the cleaning ritual, they cannot go and perform the services that they're supposed to for God. So what do? They walk around. But here is the Samaritan who sees, he knows the laws, but he doesn't care. He goes because he has compassion and mercy. And it's him who's really showing God's love through the law. My question for you today is, who is your neighbor? Seriously, who is your neighbor? Think about it. But if we're truly honest with ourselves, if we're truly honest with our souls, we know that our neighbor is where our heart is. In other words, those we love are truly our neighbor. If we love the poor, they're our neighbor. If we love people of different races and skin color, they are our neighbors. But if we don't, they're not. But I'm here to tell you that Christ tells us that all people should be our neighbor. He even shows us. Who is your neighbor? It's where your heart lies. You see, the problem we have sometimes in our churches and in our society is that we allow, basically kind of two Christians. We allow one where the world or our society molds us. It molds our hearts into who we are. And it may take years to mold us into what society wants from us. And then we can stamp Jesus on it, and that's how we go out and treat people in judgment, or how we are with them with a kind of mercy. On the other hand, there are people who over the years are molded by Christ Himself. Molded our hearts, molded over and over by Christ, and then we can be whoever we are in society stamped. But that's how the kind of mercy we have for others. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Katrina, 10 years ago, remember? We thought everything was okay in New Orleans, and we thought, thank God, they'd been spared. But then a few hours later, we saw the disaster that happened. Suddenly they're flooded and people lost everything. There was a call for chaplains to come and help at the Superdome and to help people out in the street. And people came. Matter of fact, our seminary, we were looking at going ourselves. But by the time we could get ready, a few days later, they actually said, stop. We're not taking any more chaplains. And matter of fact, they were getting rid of them. And we were like, what? And here's why. One set of chaplains went in, and they sat with the families, and they prayed with them, and they even cried with them, and they listened to their story. They helped them with clothes and food and whatever they could get for them, as well as even sitting down and filling out forms for some of the people who didn't have the education enough to understand the forms of FEMA and other agencies. And they loved and they cared for them. There was another set of chaplains who went in and hugged them and cried with them and talked with them and told them, you do know this is your fault. This is your fault. You see, this is the punishment that God has given to New Orleans for all the devil work you've been doing for all of these years. All this satanic worshiping and voodoo dolls and everything. You're getting what you deserve. This is what they're telling people who have lost everything. I ask you, who is the real neighbor? It's the one that's molded by Jesus Christ, not society. Who is your neighbor? We're in the middle of a tragedy right now. We are absolutely in the middle of a tragedy right now in our own town. There's been lots of tragedies that have happened in the past. I mean, probably more than we ever want to count. Matter of fact, the day I was born, in the first 24 hours of my life, there was a tragedy going on in Austin, Texas, at the University of Texas. There have been tragedies, one after another. We've been watching them as they have been building. And I was even just praying for my own hometown of Charleston, South Carolina, for what happened a year ago when the young man went into the church and shot up innocent people. But then there is a tragedy, and this time we found evil that came to our front door. This evil on Thursday night came to our front door, it broke into our house, and it grabbed us by the throat. As all of us were sitting there watching on TV, as this tragedy unfolded, watching innocent people run. I even had a family member that was downtown. I was scared out of my mind. And then we started to see the one thing we really didn't want to see. The body count. 1, 2, 3, 4. And in the waiting night, 5. Like many of you, I didn't sleep well that night. I couldn't sleep. I just kept waking up, and I would check the headlines again to see what is the latest, as our whole entire city was frozen in fear. And it was the next morning when I got up and started to pray. And I called downtown the diocese and talked with them, that I had to remember what I just told to you. Is my heart made by society, or is it made by Christ? Instead of being angry, I went downtown and I was at Thanksgiving Square. And I met with other religious leaders and people from the city itself, and first responders and the police and all them that were there wearing these. And I was shocked about how big it really got, and news was everywhere. But we came together. At least for a small period of time, we came together. What we wanted was to love each other as neighbors. What I found, talking to so many different people, the common thing we had was fear. It has been fear for a long time in this country that has been dividing us. It is the evil of fear that has crept into every one of our homes and every one of our hearts, including myself. If you think about it, for a long time in this nation, it is starting to be divided. I have actually preached about this a couple of times, but it's still going on when I see us dehumanize each other on Facebook, just based on your belief. To dehumanize and insult someone because they're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent is disgraceful. After all, isn't that what our country is all about? And yet, we turn against each other and say some of the worst things that I have ever seen said in my life. It's fear that's causing that. It's fear that when I went and talked to police officers on Thursday, or Friday, and other people in the street, and praying with them, I will tell you, and we can debate till the day Christ comes back, but I'm going to tell you, there's real fear in the African American community. They are scared they're going to be shot by police officers. On the flip side, police officers are scared that every time they make a stop, it may be their last. White people are scared because we have people now that are making a threat that they want to kill white people. Hispanics have been scared for years of being deported or being assaulted because they're Hispanic. The fear is real. The fear is in all of us. But there is good news. The good news really is Jesus Christ. And I'm not just saying that to say it, but it is a beginning for all of us. You see, the one thing Jesus says to all of us more than anything else is the words, fear not. Fear not. Why? Because it is Christ who will have the last word on this earth. It is Jesus Christ that we are followers of, and therefore we should be molded by Him. If our hearts are molded by Christ, then this is where the fear can stop. It's with our own heart and start loving our neighbor. So a quote from Thomas Merton I would like to say. If my compassion is true, if our compassion is true, if it be deep compassion of the heart and not a legal affair or a mercy learned from a book and practiced on others like a pious exercise, then my compassion for others is God's mercy for me. My patience for them is His patience for me. My love for them is His love for me. It is Jesus who teaches us compassion, love, patience, forgiveness, and healing. It's what He taught His disciples, and He teaches us. And He teaches us to love our neighbor as ourselves. And if we take these gifts that God has given each one of us, we can go into the world and build a bigger neighborhood. Be a good Samaritan. Don't avoid it, and don't walk on the other side. Amen.